Beautiful. Prue, floor is yours.
Okay, I'm just looking at Matt's comment. I think that is fair. I think the south side of the roundabout would be difficult, but you are doing well if you get the north side. I've certainly been involved in developments like that, and hopefully someone else is covering that south side. Okay. I am sharing my screen, am I? Okay, so now we are getting to brownfield sites. Okay, so where are crossings needed? So we again need to be looking at where there's risk, where connection is needed. But we have a very different challenge with our brownfield sites. It's a theoretical, we aren't in the theoretical world anymore. This is the actual world. We've got people who live there. Things have already been built and it's expensive to retrofit. So the model we used for brownfield site is where are crossings most needed in brownfield sites. And we think about risk, we think about connection, and we also think about feasibility. Hence the flying pig has been introduced to complement our crocodile. So feasibility. Talking about feasibility, there's places where we can install raised crossings, and we've got regulatory control systems and rules established in the Australian standards around that. So I'll talk quickly about the different rules we've got. So for a pedestrian path, the zebra crossing we were talking about before, that is established. The rules around that are in Australian Standard 1742.10. This is where we use pedestrian crossing or zebra line marking and the signs and lines that are associated with that. We also have priority pathways, which are for shared paths. And in that situation, we use the giveaway signage and the giveaway line marking. So that's in 1742.9, which is the bicycle guidance. So that could be for a bicycle path or for a shared path. So this is where we establish the rules about where we can install raised crossings. So to summarize some of the kind of important guidance when you're thinking about which sites you can install them in. So under Australian Standard 1742.10, we can have no more than one moving lane of traffic in any one direction. So these are the current rules around where we can install them. We have a speed limits on approach cannot exceed 50 kilometres an hour. So 60 kilometres an hour roads can be a real challenge in the network. We can install them on the 50 kilometres an hour roads. It also specifies not on arterial routes, and the 85th percentile speeds on slip lanes are 60 kilometres an hour or less. So Queensland has developed supplementary guidance to the Australian standard to say that we can also install them on roundabouts, even where the speed is over 60 kilometres an hour, 60 kilometres an hour and over. So in Queensland, we can do this. We can install raised crossings here, and even up to 70 kilometres an hour. That is now something that has been evolved. What we do look at in that situation is we still need to make sure that this 85th percentile speed at the crossing should not be more than 60 kilometres an hour. And so when I'm assessing this kind of work, I kind of look at what the speeds are at the moment, and then we can count on taking about approximately 20 kilometres an hour off, which is what we're losing. So Ken will go into this in more detail, but basically we recommend when we're putting raised crossings on, we recommend having the raised crossings 1 car length back from the roundabout. And basically we're applying the conditions that were already in the Australian standard for slip lanes to roundabouts as well. Do you have to reduce the speed approaching the roundabout, or can it still be 60 kilometres an hour? It can still be 60 kilometres an hour, so you don't have to implement changes to reduce that posted speed limit. But you do need to make sure that, for example, say 85th percentile speeds were 80 kilometres an hour at the without the raised crossings, then you can only rely on taking 20 kilometres an hour off, and so it would only be down to 60, and that wouldn't work.
Another you hear, could you answer Michael's question as well?
Now that I'm here, which is Michael's, can you reduce the speed from 60 to 50 with LATM or similar? I'm not sure what the case is in New Zealand, but here we, no, it is also defined in the Australian standard. You need to go through the speed limit review process to do that, but certainly LATM will support a lower speed limit. And actually, introducing the roundabout, typically we already get speed limits 60 kilometers an hour or less on the approaches to the roundabout. So even without reducing the speed limit, we are in that realm, and then we can rely on the crossing to take another 20 kilometers an hour off. So the focus of the Queensland guidance is not on what the speed limit is, it's what the existing speeds are at the approaches to the roundabout, and using the crossings to get a further 20 kilometers an hour or so approximately off that. So that's really the focus for those. We might, Ken is going to go into this in more detail, so I don't want to get caught up on this because I don't think we have time for that at the moment. Sightline for pedestrians, we will get into that. Ken will get into that tomorrow. It is often easier to achieve the sight lines with the raised crossings for pedestrians than without them. So road safety platforms are efficient, safe, and value for money in treatment. Install them where you can to facilitate safe crossing movements. Modify road environments where you can to install raised crossings. Install other treatments where you can't. So I want to give an example of how I would approach that. So 60 kilometre an hour roads, doing the speed limit process, introducing raised crossings is a great outcome. We are suddenly getting that conflict point from 60 kilometres an hour where it's almost certainly going to be a death or serious injury, down to 30 kilometres an hour at the crossing point. So small reduction in speed limit that we can argue for to get a huge benefit in safety if we have these specific locations for crossing. So that's a great way to do it. Using the signals where you need to. Often what I find is that, I want to reduce the 60 kilometre an hour roads down because we've got limited budget. And when we get to a multi-lane road, that's all we can do. Another thing you can do is introduce roundabouts. So roundabouts are a really safe treatment for all users. They can control that local speed environment. It can also help you reduce your side impact crashes and things by changing intersections to left in, left out and things like that. So always keep in mind that installing a roundabout can offer a lot of solutions as well. Other considerations when it comes to feasibility. So I know we had sight lines, we have, there's issues with drainage, cost is a big one, practitioner and organisational experiences, that's something that comes up in our surveys as well. So I've just put a link here. This is the TMR, Transport and Main Roads Queensland guideline for raised priority crossings. So this has the outputs of some of the observational studies that they undertook before approving guidance around putting raised crossings at side roads. So this can be a really good resource for understanding what research and what investigations have been undertaken to gain confidence in these facilities. So it's a good reference to familiarise yourself with if you want to know, how do these stand up in practice? And session 4 is going to go into some of these site constraints. So that's when you'll get into the detail of that. So now we're going to go to methodologies for wear in brownfield sites. Simple methodologies for wear. Now, I think we had a question before on what's the spacing for raised crossings, or what's the spacing for crossings? How often should we have a crossing? There's no answer for that. I don't have a specific answer for that. And that's going to depend on your site. And I think it's going to depend on having a good methodology for working out where you need raised crossings. And in brownfield sites, remembering where they're most needed, because we've got limited budgets and we want to be putting these things where they're most needed. So I've got 3 methodologies here, and a couple of them are really quite simple. And then we've got the community-led planning we'll go into in a bit more detail. So the first one is crossing upgrades. And when we're looking at methodologies for where we put raised crossings in, a simple way can be looking at where are our existing crossings. Often they have popped up in response to community complaints and previous requests about where people need crossings. So if we look at our network and we say, hey, there's a crossing there, it's not consistent with safe systems, the cars are coming through at 60, and we know we've got a desire line there. We can go out and observe it if we need to. That's an obvious site. This way we can look at sites that have risk, because we can assess that risk using our safe system principles. Connection, we're pretty sure there's connection there and we can establish that. And often these places are really feasible in terms of putting crossings in because we've already got lighting, we've already got sight lines and an established demand there. Roundabout crossing. So roundabouts are great locations. Like we've got all these movements coming together in one at one place. We've got low vehicle speeds. We've already established that low vehicle speed. And people can find roundabouts really difficult to cross. So they pop up again and again in my surveys as places that people don't feel comfortable crossing. So these can be a great place to retrofit crossings because we have, if you just look at these ticks, we know we've got risk because of that lack of predictability. It's feasible. We've already got those vehicle speeds managed, and connection, that might be, it might be a great place for connection. I think it often is, because often it's this four-way intersection, and where we've got four-way movements for vehicles, you're likely to have them for pedestrians as well, but it's not guaranteed. So upgrading those. I'm going along a bit quickly now because I think I'm a bit behind. Established demand. So this is where we've got site observations or areas that people are mobile, or it's not looking at a site kind of specific. It's a bit more generic, kind of like a town centre, something. This is an example of a town centre, a school. So we know there's certain areas where there's definitely going to be demand, and we could focus on those areas. So, a fairly crude model is we will upgrade the crossings around our town centres or around each of the side roads of our primary schools or secondary schools, because we know this is an issue. So then we can target it where there's risk. We know connections needed. Feasibility, not sure about that as well. Another way of looking at established demand is whenever I see bus stops on the network, remembering from what we were talking about the other day with Bridget, people need access to public transport. If we think of somebody who's got who can't see, who's got a vision impairment, then they're not going to be able to drive a motor vehicle. So they could be more dependent on the bus network. So wherever we have bus stops, we have to think about how are people crossing the road at those bus stops. Certainly we get a lot of complaints and issues identified where people are struggling to cross the road. Often with bus stops, we have older people using buses and children. So yeah, it's a challenge, but we know that there's an established demand. We can also use some of our public transport patronage data to find out how many people are using them, and do we have people with concession cards or children using those facilities as well. So we can target our investment in that way as well. And there's potentially an opportunity there to measure through our ticketing and systems as well, if we do upgrade the crossings at bus stops as well. Right, so the third approach, which is reflective of what we did in the homework and what we'll go into a little bit more detail about, and that's community-led planning. And this is where we are using community knowledge to identify where there's risk and where they need connection. So I like to kind of think about it as, we're almost running this simulation model to work out all these things. What's the riskiest place and the most needed place? And actually our community members are going to tell us where that comes together. So they can tell us where the severance points are, where does it feel unsafe, where is there latent demand? So we can go out and observe users on the network, but that doesn't tell us about the people who aren't using the network and the kids that want to walk or ride to school, or the people who want to use the bus but are actually getting in their car at the moment because they can't get to the bus stops and things. It also helps us work out what are the priorities, because we can get enough people to go, okay, well, we've got more people who need it over here. And often these communities have very good communication channels that we can already pop into. So this is a great way of identifying where there's risk, connection, and connection. We also have issues as well. No, I might just skip that. So community-led planning principles. Planning should be proactive. So it's happening before a crash and before a project. So it's right at the investigation stage. We haven't identified where the crossings are needed. We're using it to identify where they might be needed. It acknowledges that local people are experts on where neighbourhoods need connections. Collective community input creates a data set, and that allows us to focus our investment. And planning needs to be around existing and emerging communities of interest. So we want it to be specific and relatively small. Walking is something that happens at a local network. We need to get it really right at that fine grain. We can get a crossing, 50 meters out off the alignment and nobody uses it. So we want it to be quite specific. Communities need expert support and agency champions and funding to support their plans and to legitimise their needs. So even we're asking people where they need crossings, we're opening up a conversation about road safety and what kind of things people want in their community. And I actually think this is a really good way of deflecting from other conversations around parking and the other things that are often dominating our public discussion. So we'll go through a case study of community-led planning in 4 steps. We're mainly today talking about finding where we need crossings, defining and prioritising what the issues are, and often we go through those sustainable safety principles when we do that. We won't go so much into scoping or planning or designing a building today, but you can see from this image that we go from being parent, carer, community input kind of dominated, and then the engineering, it takes over in the second half of the program, really. That's when they look at solving those problems after we know what the problems are. So this is an example of some of the results from a school survey that we undertook at the Sunshine Coast. And so for this survey, we had about 80 people who responded to a survey, and we asked them where are safer crossings needed. And these are some of the outcomes of the survey. So for starters, we've got 80 people who responded to this survey, and just like you did, they got 10 spots each that they could put and answer each question. So we don't have hundreds of different locations where people want crossings. We've got kind of a call to action here with about 10 different places on the map, which we need to think about treatments for. So it's I think it's a really good way of simplifying this problem and going, what do we need to be focusing on? Now, we don't have perfect information, but we've got enough that we can probably work it out with some confidence. So what did they identify? So this hotspot here, they've identified a side road here. This is what I'm presuming it includes. There's a side road here and another and a zebra crossing here. When we go into the detailed comments, we get comments like, oh, the zebra crossing's good, but we need some of those speed cushions to slow the vehicles down. So I actually think we're getting, really good community feedback in line with the safe system principles. They want the vehicles to be slowing down. They want people's foot on the brake at this place. So that was the site that I showed you before where we were scoping out the speed cushions. It's really interesting, in nearly every survey I've done, refuge crossings pop up as an area of concern. Now, these refuge crossings, they meet site distance requirements, according to engineering standards, these are fine. But again and again, in these surveys, we find out that they're not meeting the community's needs. I got a long anecdote about how one mother takes the kids' bikes across first and then has to come back for the kids as well, because it's a busy road and they're relying on, using voice control. You can't hold a child's hand when you're all riding bikes and things. So she ends up going backwards and forwards a few times just to get across that crossing. So great information to tell us that our existing treatments that we thought were working fine are actually not working that well. Another example of some of the hotspots, the ones closer to the school will always be, you'll have more users identifying them because they're congregating at the school, but we've still got places like this roundabout, which is further away, which is really popping up as a hotspot. So that roundabout, as well as there's a refuge crossing here or a cut through over here, which has been identified again. And to me, when I look at this data, I'm like, okay, the parents are pretty good at these safe system principles. And I think the vision of no one being killed or seriously injured in our road safety guidance. And then, if you think of a parent's vision for their child walking or riding to school, no one being killed or seriously injured, it's probably pretty well aligned. So it's something we can think about. Understanding barriers about what works well and what doesn't work well. In these surveys, we also ask people about different types of crossing treatments to get some more information. It supplements the maps and gives us more prescriptive guidance on what type of crossings we should be using. So we asked parents, how concerned are you about your child using this type of crossing and show them a picture of the different crossings. I haven't got them all here, but there's I've just got a set. So not concerned, somewhat concerned, and very concerned. So if we look at an untreated crossing, we've got 85% of parents are very concerned, and then most of the rest of the parents are somewhat concerned. If we look at an untreated side road, which we've talked about a bit today, we've got 60% very concerned and the remainder somewhat concerned. So before this, we had this data, it was difficult to know, whether these were barriers in the network or not. And it seems to pop up consistently that people are concerned about these side roads. Refuge at roundabout, 35% very concerned, and most of the others somewhat concerned. Refuge crossing, similar result. So we've got less than 10% of people not concerned in that situation. And then we look at our raised crossing, and it's going pretty well. We've got 80% of people not concerned. Yeah, Hafez.
Sorry, can I ask a nerdy question? We've discussed this before, like the overlap between perception and actual safety. Have we done any sort of validation or the comparison of this data and actual safety data?
Okay, so I wouldn't advise overlaying this with crash data, because people are going to avoid the areas that are the most dangerous. So crash data is not going to pick up on that avoidance. What I do in my studies is I overlay it with safe system principles. So that's why I go through those 5 risk factors and I say, hey, what's going on here? Is it genuinely a risky place using my engineering principles? That's what I do on a site-by-site basis. And I think that's, it shows again and again, like things with the raised crossing, with the zebra crossing, which the parents asked for some speed cushions on. It's exactly what you would recommend as an engineer to bring it in line with our road safety guidance. But is this going to stop a whole lot of crashes on the network? Probably not, because people are probably avoiding those places anyway. If people have to walk in the cycle in those areas, then I think there's a good chance that this will work really well and people will definitely pick up on that. But in places where people are avoiding the network and they've got other options, we have very high rates of car usage in Australia for parents dropping children at school. That's that could be an avoidance measure. So yeah, what I would say, I also have been down this rabbit hole a bit, Hafez, in terms of researching to understand, hey, are humans good at picking up, at detecting this kind of risk? Is that something that we have evolved to do? And certainly from my understanding, it's yes, we're very good at identifying fast stuff coming towards us as risky. That's something that, our brains have adapted to avoid us getting eaten by lions. And a car is similar to us getting eaten by lions.
Maybe I need to clarify my position, because I think, like crash is a very simplified version of what I wanted to say. So I was thinking about like Bayesian sort of probabilistic sort of understanding of safety, which is based on not just safe system, also exposure. So I think that this is something that, we need to sort of nail down at some stage. And I don't want to bore the participants here, but I think what you're doing is very essential, because you're pointing another light at the problem. So what I was going to say is just not safety important. It is perception important as well. So I just wanted to emphasize your point, but I think it's a bit, more complex, as you would agree. So.
Okay. Should we leave that rabbit hole there? Thank you. That will be a long conversation. So yeah, just coming out from this, with a raised treatment, we've got 80% not concerned. So this is where really we are, meeting our user tests, and we're designing it for our user, and we are also very well aligned with safe system principles. So that's my little go at seeing a judgment of how well aligned each of those treatments are with safe system principles. It's not cut and dry, because, a refuge crossing in a low speed environment where the cars are going 30 k's an hour and the vehicle speeds are relatively low, the volumes are low, that's going to be a great treatment, but it's not usually a great treatment in the places we're doing it at the moment. A summary of brownfield sites. So we've got the three different places there in terms of, 3 different methodologies: crossing upgrades, looking at places with established demand, and then this community-led planning approach. action time. So we've just got some quick true or falses and multiple choices that we're going to use the chat to go on this one. So the spots on this map show A, an unusually precise storm forecast, B, future planning for electric helicopter air taxi landing pads, or C, places where safe system principles, parental concerns, children and vehicles most likely collide. I think everybody's thinking, oh no, I thought they were all thinking about it, but I hadn't scrolled down. C. Hey, who thinks it's an unusually precise storm forecast? That would be impressive. Anyway, it is C, and I was feeling very clever for that eloquent description. Anyway, apparently the helicopter air taxi landing pads are not that far away, according to our local helicopter expert. But yes, that's what we've identified with this kind of community-led planning. True or false? 8 out of 10 parents said they were not concerned when their kids use this type of crossing. Yep, we've got a lot of trues going on there. That's correct. Wombat's up to that one. Likelihood and consequences of crashes at this intersection are higher because A, vehicle speed is greater than 50 kilometers an hour. B, the crossing is frequently used by children. C, the crossing is frequently used by elderly people. D, there are no other crossings within 1 kilometer in each direction. Or E, all of the above. Yeah, I think we're getting all of the above there. And I think like we've put in there that there's no other crossings within 1 kilometer of the crossing. It will depend on your network, how often you need crossings and what's going on in that place. But when you've got a network like this that has very limited crossing facilities, and then the ones that are there are really risky, then that's going to contribute to the risk at that side. I didn't show the video. Anyway, you can see the 18,000 vehicles a day going past there. I like to describe it as a shooting range in the middle of the town. Really, it's just it's full on. Stretch. Okay, we are getting there. Stretch. Before we talk about blah blah, very lovely example of Fez. Impressive. Okay, where did we decide crossings are needed in blah blah? So we'll go through the results of our case study now. Let me see. I might just so as you know from your homework, you were given 10-point markers, up to 10 places where you could say where are safer crossings needed. So think about the sites you identified. How many of them might you consider making safer with a raised crossing? What did we think? So when we identified sites, we said all of them, most of them, about half of them, or some of them. So most of them was generally the response. And I think that's good. I think that's a great place that we can be starting. All of them, that's ambitious, but go for it. I'm all for ambition when it talks about raised crossings, and we can look at, like we talked about before, these are a strong, cost-effective treatment, modify the road environment to make the road environment conducive to installing them. That can be done with relatively little compromises. I've put this in the Miro board as well, this chart here, but I think it's interesting for you to see what other practitioners see as the challenges. So what are the possible reasons that safer crossings haven't been provided at these sites? We haven't undertaken enough consultation to understand what the priorities are in the region, or we need to do more consultation. So we had everybody either strongly agreeing or agreeing with that we need to be talking more to our communities about that. It does provide quite clear data when you do that. Better technical guidance is needed about where we need crossings. So the guidance isn't strong. We have guidance around where we can't put certain types of crossings. We have really strong guidance about that. But in places like Bly, we don't have these really strict requirements saying where we need to put crossings in. And this town has grown and grown. And when I developed that exercise that we did on new developments, I kind of had Bly in mind, because what you see is more and more developments being put on the edge of town, the road getting busier, but no one coming back and saying, hey, at what point does this road become too difficult for people to cross? So we need to be thinking about that. So yeah, I think there's avenues for better technical guidance, and that's what your colleagues are saying here as well. It's not easy to justify investment in crossings on technical grounds. So I had a lot of people in doing that, but some people are saying that's not an issue and they disagree with that. So be interesting to hear from some of those people if they are finding, you know, that they use technical grounds, to put it in the chat and say how they're doing that. I certainly find the safe system principles are helpful from our perspective. Safer crossings are not a priority for communities. Well, yeah, I think most of us were disagreeing with that. And it seems to be something that pops up again and again. It's one of the fundamental requirements, really. And crash data doesn't pick up all the barriers for walking or riding. So yeah, it's not clear cut in terms of this. We have to pick up the where people want crossings or that avoidant behavior as well. And it's not necessarily going to show up in crash data as well. So that might be one reason that some things aren't funded. So that's some of our outputs from the survey. Now, I've got a question here. So there's two maps here. One is the results of the community survey. One is the results of the practitioner survey. And I want you to tell me which one is which. So which is the left one and which one is the right one. So just identify one of them and tell me which one you think it is. I love it. I love it when we're going right and left. That's perfect. My biggest fear that everyone will say the same thing. Left, right. Someone's going to tell me why. If you want to put in, yeah, why you've made that decision, I'm really interested in this. What do you think, Hafez?
Can I make myself vulnerable? Yes, I would say practitioners on the left because they're very specific. Community is wider, they work more widely. So I would say community on the right, practitioners on the left.
No.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm learning.
I told you, community members are the experts of their neighborhoods. They know what's going on to a level of detail that we do not.
Oh my God.
Yeah. This is what my map would look like. That one on the right is the one that my map would look like if I didn't have the community data. I'm like, where do we need crossings? And I'll be like, here. One of the most interesting spots, can I draw your attention to this roundabout in the middle of town? This big roundabout here. Can you see you can see my, yeah. So that roundabout, when we were engaging with authorities about where we needed to put crossings, that's where the authorities thought, yep, that roundabout needs improvement. And, you know, I think that's a good call. If I didn't know this area, that's what I'd think as well. There's actually an underpass down the road a bit, which comes into the bottom of the school. And there's no pathways on the right-hand side and there's no frontages of these properties and blah, blah, blah. When you look into it really closely, which you guys had none of that information, that roundabout has a really low function in the walking and cycling networks. Hardly anyone uses it except for some road cyclists. So we could have blown all our budget just fixing that roundabout. But fortunately, we spoke to the community and they gave us really prescriptive guidance, which was good. It's a much more economical problem to solve with this map on the left than it is on the right. And it's not that difficult to get this kind of data as well. So obviously, after we have this data, we've got to go through it with our lens to go, okay, where is it, you know, practical and feasible for us to upgrade things and where are these solvable problems? But certainly it's a great place to start. Right, so community and practitioner. Sorry, I should have put those up a long time ago, so we could have just been really clear about that. More nuance to placements in the community ones. Yeah, it did become really clear with the community data that there's a few key crossings, and if we can get those right and improve those, we can really connect this town back together. Yeah. Okay, so that's our, it was perfect, Hafez.
It was like, I really laugh at David's dad's joke. You know, like, so dad joke in the chat room. The community left the chat because practitioners is sort of right.
So that's an example of community-led planning. This was a really quite simple study. The community was already engaged. The school wanted better infrastructure around the school, and we just had to develop a survey to capture what their thoughts were. So after we'd find the barriers, what we do then is run it through that process of defining and prioritizing, applying those safe system principles we've been talking about through the session, and then scoping and planning solutions. So that's where you see these yellow crossings, or the banana crossings, as I like to see. I like to describe them as an outcome of that project. We've got just a couple of activities left. And I want to kind of put some of this stuff together. I know the sustainable safety principles, you know, they're pretty complicated, and we've gone through them fairly quickly. But in this situation, so which of the sustainable safety principles is this facility struggling with? One or more, just use the chat. What do you think? Functionality, predictability, homogeneity, state of awareness, or forgivingness? Not a right or wrong answer really here. There's just clues with the signs and what's going on. A, functionality. Yeah, I think that's a great call. Yep, we've obviously got a lot of traffic, and we've got a shared zone. It's trying to do a few too many things at once. C, homogeneity. Yeah, it's trying to create that 10 kilometers an hour zone, but they're not going 10. We're probably getting it to about 30. A, B, D. Yes, predictability is an issue, so I'll put that in there as well. State of awareness is D, so that's a good call as well. These shared zones, no, we've Bridget talked about yesterday, people with disabilities struggling with some of these shared zones. Also, children, my experience is that they don't detect, like if all the pavement is the same color, they see it as all being part of the playground, whatever it is. They detect, you know, asphalt is an obvious, that's a road, and we can train them to stop there. But children, guide dogs, they're going to struggle with that as well. And forgivingness. So we're possibly getting to that 30 kilometers an hour. By signing at 10, we're probably getting to that forgiving kind of environment. It's probably the only thing we've got going for us, really, because everything else is really pretty hectic. So, and is that on-street parking? There's on-street parking on both sides of the road there too. So people will be stepping out from behind parked cars as well. So that limits your sight lines and things. Ironically, all the can raised crossings be installed on bus routes? I think I made this one pretty easy. Yes, but I think we need to take away from that bus routes. Really important for vulnerable users. Think about the people who are reliant on bus users to connect to their communities. They are also reliant on being able to safely cross the road to access the bus stop on the opposite side, either at the start or end of their journey. Is the next issue? No, it's a well-designed raised crossing. This one's been in there for a number of years. Speed cushions as well. I was on the bus the other day and just taking note to how it went over the speed cushions, and that was fine as well. But Ken will go into that in more detail in terms of designing it for a bus so that we make sure we're not bottoming out. So that will be something you get out of the next session. Okay. This crossing is on a 60 kilometre an hour road. It connects to schools, bus stops and residents to the town centre. Complaints have been received about this crossing and others on the street. Use the poll to describe how you feel about the following treatments to treat this problem. So our next poll, Hafez, and I've got a video here. We've seen this site before. Great, I've got the poll has come up. So, you know, I haven't been very specific with the definitions here. You know, it's just about, you know, is this the one that you think you'd prefer? Is this one maybe, or an if I have to? That's kind of what I run through. Often when we go through these exercises, we recommend a couple of different treatments, and one might be aspirational and others might be expensive.
Prue, would you mind
Yeah.
like, playing the video again?
Oh, yes.
Just love people to see it again.
If you have questions about the site, you can ask questions as well.
Yeah. Cool. No, people are getting onto it. Yeah, fantastic.
Mhm.
Do we know the AADT data for this location?
Oh, yes, we do. We do. It is, let's say, 17,000 vehicles per day. Is that going to throw a cat amongst the pigeons? I don't know if anybody wants to change based on that.
Give another like half a minute. We've got 5 people left if they want to put in the poll. Okay. Ending now.
Okay.
And share results. Can you see them?
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay. Can everyone else see? Yeah. Mine's a bit different to other people's. So our first one, so what did I ask? Use the poll to describe how you feel about the following treatments to treat this problem. So signalized pedestrian crossing. So we've got the most common one there is preferred, really. So most people would prefer a signalized crossing. Yep, I would say that is the most obvious treatment in this situation and what we conventionally would use. And I think that's going to be 1,000 times better than what it is at the moment in terms of it's really going to manage those traffic volumes at this site. So maybe, and we've got an if I have to, yeah. I sympathise with the if I have to, because they're expensive and often we are struggling for budgets. So that's something I take into consideration as well. Signalised intersections with crossings. So we've got similar with a maybe, and I think you probably need a little bit more information there. There are actually side roads just to the right here. So that would actually have an added benefit in terms of protecting right turning vehicles and those movements as well. So we could improve the safety for all occupants on the road. So that's a good option whenever there's a signalised pedestrian crossing required within adjacent to intersections. That's something to consider. Raised signalised intersection with crossings. So we've got, yeah, it's probably the highest so far with preferred. So if we do raise the intersection, then we get that benefit of reducing the vehicle speeds as well. So addressing that risk that Bridget talked about yesterday, if someone makes a mistake at a signalised crossing, then it's less likely to result in a fatal or serious injury if it's raised. So yeah, that's John, assuming one is not raised, so this one would be a raised one. So I should just write at raised there. Reduce posted speed and install a raised crossing along the corridor. So we've got, that's probably just as popular as the signalised intersection. So it's certainly something worth keeping in mind in this corridor as well. The other treatments are roundabouts. So you've kind of got free-flowing treatments there where you're not, platooning the vehicles, which might complement the roundabout treatments as well, provided you can get that speed limit down and then relying on it to take another 20 k's an hour at the crossing point. Roundabout with raised crossings. This is a maybe. So again, given that there are side roads there, it's not particularly obvious there, but this can be a really strong treatment because then you can create that environment where you really provide access movements, not just for pedestrians, but for vehicles as well, and can protect those from the right turning. The right turning movements is quite a significant crash risk as well. So that's something where, yeah, you can create this little microcosm where a raised crossing is suddenly very suitable as well. So like we've seen, all of those treatments are an option. I think my main reason to put this activity in there is to make sure that we put raised crossings in the mix. And what's happening at this site is, I think, based on the very constrained road reserve, it will probably either be a signalised pedestrian crossing or a raised crossing is what we'll be looking at this site. So yes, but the other options would have been considered if we had enough space there to put in a signalised intersection or a roundabout. Roundabout, what are we getting there? Do combining signals and raised crossing create confusion due to typical crossing function? Signalised typically has no vehicle obstruction with green light. No, raised signalised intersections are working. They've been used in Melbourne at a number of sites, haven't they? Fairs, are you familiar with any of the sites in? I think there's one in Springfield Road.
Yeah, we can put like examples. I wouldn't find it confusing. But maybe Chris, you can sort of provide more sort of information. Why do you think they would be confusing? Just Prue, we've got 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. We are moving on. We are very close to there. Okay. Yeah, with the raised intersections, usually it's about raising the entire intersection. So you're not going up, down. It's raising on the approach to the intersection, but we can put in some examples of that as well. So I am very quickly going to go through, just reflect on what we did. So just starting backward at the start again, our raised crossing is about the regulatory signs and lines that give path users priority, and having that raised platform or speed cushions. You'll hear more about those in the next session to reduce the vehicle speeds. Where are we now? We did have a go of answering those surveys and seeing, how it was to answer it in your neighbourhoods. But also thinking about what we were actually thinking about. This is reflecting on Bridget's thinking about thinking, making sure we're checking for those unconscious bias and thinking about all those different users. We went through greenfield sites and how connection is really needed across the network. Think of everywhere cars go, and that's where you're potentially going to have people walking. We also went through risk and connectivity. So we went through our sustainable safety principles. Brownfield sites, we had those 3 methodologies with the crossing upgrades, the established demand areas, and then our community-led planning. The rules about where and how we can use them and modify our environments to get better crossings in. And then our blind case study and the heat maps and our community out competing our practitioners again. And that's it. I will say, I know I've gone through an awful lot today. There is in the resources, there's like an A3 cheat sheet, which I think has kind of the checklists for the 5 criteria. And also it's just kind of some of the key points from today as well. So that's my bringing it together cheat sheet to hopefully support you in future.
Awesome. And thank you very much, Prue, as always, thought-provoking. And it's like it shows that I'll be like in many of your courses and I'm still learning, so it's amazing. And I wanted to just give a really heartfelt thank to everyone who attended today and all your comments, contributions, doing the exercise before the meeting, and just helping me and Prue to help you here with some potential new learnings. So I want to thank you and thank Prue and invite you to come to the last module, which will be concluding the course. So thank you very much, and Prue, well done.
Thank you. If you have questions, let us just get in contact.
Exactly. $50 for the most difficult question from Michael Langdon. No. Take care, people. Have a lovely day. Have a lovely day, Prue.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.